Hello and welcome to Nerdverse Unshuffled, a geeky podcast where we introduce you to the language of board games. We are your hosts, Jacques van Fayyaad and Fayyaad Hendricks.
If I ask you to imagine people playing board games, what do you see? You see two or more people competing to see who wins, people working together to defeat a monster, solve a puzzle, or someone playing a board game alone. Would it surprise you to learn that there are even more possibilities?
So in this episode, we discuss play modes, cooperative, competitive, and plenty of options besides and in between. Since play mode is a very high-level term that doesn't make much sense on its own, we're going to look at several examples in this episode. We'll discuss each definition in turn, and then we'll mention a very, very few select examples.
Awesome. So we're going to cover each play mode in their own separate episodes sometime in the future. But for now, we'll give an overview of all the different ways there are to play games, because there are a lot more than you might expect. And by the end of the episode, you should have discovered at least one new type of board game to explore. So if you're bored of always playing the same kinds of games, let's get ready to find out a host of other options from your hosts.
So we do want to explain what we mean by play modes before we go any further. And because I contributed this entry to the book, I'll read this one myself. Okay? So traditionally, most board games are played competitively, with individual players attempting to win the game by scoring more points than their opponents, or winning the game in some way determined by the victory conditions specified in the game's rules. But games can also be played cooperatively, semi-cooperatively, on your own or in teams, as one versus many affairs, strictly as a duel between two players, or with no more than a single player. These are referred to as play modes, a term that describes the different relations that players may have to each other and to the game's victory conditions. Each play mode has its own set of expectations that players may bring to the table, and the same game can allow several play modes, either in the original base game or in the form of an expansion.
Awesome. Very well done. So why should we be including this definition? What makes it important to us to know about?
So it was one of actually the meta terms that we introduced into the book that we hadn't really added when we wrote the series of articles on the site itself. So the Board Game Jargon Primer contains a lot of entries, but it doesn't contain a specific one about play modes. It also doesn't include a definition of competitive games, because we kind of assumed, people would know what that means.
Yeah.
But once you start looking at different terms in comparison to each other, you kind of go, as a new player, I would want more context about what we talk about when we talk about cooperative games. And then you start comparing it to other play modes, and you kind of go like, okay, well, we're kind of assuming that you know what a play mode is. And that's kind of why also we added it to the book. And now we've got a whole separate episode on it. Well, I mean, I know we had a lot of discussion back and forth about whether we were actually going to include an entry about play modes in the book.
I think what prompted it more than anything else was because initially we were saying, we're not going to put in a competitive modes, because the default for games is a competition, right? It's a competitive thing. And when you said, okay, but we need to kind of have an overview of all the others, and it's like, okay, that made a lot of sense to include. You're right.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think that covers what play modes generally are. Like I said, it doesn't really make any sense if you're not looking at specific examples. So let's look at the bog standard version of a game. So what is a competitive game?
Right, so this is what you're going to see as the majority of the games you're going to play, right? It's that players are trying to win a game based on a set of winning criteria, but the core thing is that they're up against all the other players in the game. So they're not working together, they're all in opposition. So there can only be one winner, or if it comes down to tiebreakers, there might be, tied wins. But the key is that each player is in it for themselves. it is a competition.
So, I mean, we don't really need to say much more about that because most people understand what a competitive game is.
Yeah.
And there are so many examples. We're not really going to get into very many of them.
We've been playing them since we were 6 years old.
Yeah. Monopoly, Snakes and Ladders, Ludo.
Yeah.
But there's also like some of the games we mentioned in the creators episode. So Ark Nova, Scout, Wingspan, The Gallerist.
Yeah. Kanban. Well, the stuff that Vital Lacerda comes up with. The majority of them are competitive games. There's at least one exception to that. But the majority of the games that you're going to see are going to be competitive in some way or another.
Okay, so on to the next one, cooperative games. So another play mode that's becoming increasingly popular is cooperative mode.
Yeah, so you're going to find that not every single game is going to pit player against player. Like, you're not going to have me versus you, and I'm going to win all the money in Monopoly, and you're going to be the one losing. Now, in cooperative games, you got players who are working together, right, to whatever degree it is, and they can be varying degrees. And I think they're going to look for some kind of end goal versus the game.
Yeah. So again, we've spoken about some cooperative games before. We've spoken about Forbidden Island. There's an extent to which Mansions of Madness is cooperative. Well, second edition is cooperative.
Cthulhu Death May Die.
Yeah, Cthulhu Death May Die. That's fully cooperative, and it is one of my favorite modes of playing board games. But so, I mean, are there any other sort of examples that we want to mention of straightforward co-op games?
I mean, look, Matt Leacock is famous for developing co-op games. So Pandemic is the big one. He also developed the Thunderbirds game, which is a tribute to the TV show Thunderbirds, featuring those puppets, and it was fantastic. It was really great fun. I'm not sure what else you want to definitely mention, but
So I mean,
Gloomhaven.
Gloomhaven is a good one. We've spoken about that one as well.
Yeah,
so
Isaac Shoulders.
Yeah, so the definition for cooperative games does get more complicated. We'll have a separate episode, like we've mentioned, on co-op games. But one kind of variation that you do get is semi-co-op games.
Yeah, so you get games where someone can be like a traitor, right? So you're ostensibly working together, and sometimes there's one person who's you do not know if they're with you or against you, and sometimes you get games that are purely semi-cooperative on the basis of everyone. You're all working towards the same goal, right? But you all also have your own individual, goal that is at odds with everyone else's goals, and maybe at odds with the common goal. I cannot think of an example right now. I know that they do exist.
So the example that I would use there is Nemesis, which everybody gets two personal objectives at the beginning of the game.
Yeah.
One is sort of, okay, well, it's not necessarily working against the interests of the rest of the group, and one of them definitely is working against the interests of the group. And at a certain point, you can choose which one of those you're going to follow. And everybody knows that there's that chance that not everybody on your team is working with you, but you don't know.
That uncertainty, I think, is what makes the game fun.
Yeah. And Dead of Winter.
There's Feed the Kraken as well.
Yeah. Feed the Kraken, and then Dead of Winter does that as well. So everybody has a personal goal, and it may be a traitor, it may not. But yeah, so I mean, there's a bunch of games that we can mention here.
That feature traitors, and we've spoken about them before.
Yeah. So again, we'll get into semi-co-op more when we get to the cooperative games episode. But I think there's a couple of extra ones that we did want to mention as well. A couple of extra play modes that are somewhere in between these things. So, for example, one versus many games.
Yeah, that's quite a big one.
Yeah.
So one versus many. So let's get into definition of that, right? It's that one player is an outright adversary. So then, unlike a semi-cooperative where one player could be a hidden traitor type thing, and you've got no idea whether there's a traitor or not. One versus many, it's this one person is playing as the antagonist, and the other players are playing together as protagonists, if that's the way you want to put it. But it just means that one player is working on a completely different set of rules to everyone else, and the win conditions are completely different. So I mean, some good examples, right? Is Fury of Dracula, which we love playing in
Yes.
one game, where one player is Dracula, right, and plays by a thoroughly different set of rules to all the others that are, Mina and Dr. Van Helsing and all of them. They're trying to stop Dracula.
And don't forget Lord Godalming.
Yeah, Lord Arthur Holmwood, yeah. The one I want to mention that we haven't played yet, and I'd love to get around to it, is it's called Tragedy Looper, right?
Okay.
And you've got one player who is the mastermind, and he's trying to create this tragedy. Someone's going to die, someone's going to get killed. So it doesn't matter. There's a tragedy happening, right? And the other players are time travelers, and they've got to watch the events unfolding and try to stop the events happening within a certain number of time loops. It's a fascinating piece of game. Just because there's that you got the mastermind is now trying to outwit the other players, even though he knows what's going on. If the players figure it out too easily, then the mastermind might also have a difficult time. And I did want to also mention Pandemic. There's I believe it's the In the Lab expansion. We might have to just do a bit of research and check if it's In the Lab or if it's the other one. I can't recall which expansion it is. But it adds the bioterrorist, right? So suddenly a game that was a fully cooperative game now becomes a one versus many with the expansion, where the bioterrorist doesn't have a pawn where he moves on the board. He tracks his moves on a sheet of paper afterwards, but is trying to basically spread a fifth disease to cause even more trouble for the rest of the players, as if the game wasn't hard enough.
Yeah, it's the On the Brink, I think.
On the Brink expansion, right?
Yeah. It's
so we can edit it back in later on. So Pandemic with its On the Brink expansion adds the bioterrorist.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and I did also just want to mention the classic examples of a one versus many, which is something like a campaign game, like Descent: Journeys in the Dark. Second edition is works like this. Mansions of Madness, the first edition worked like this, and then they changed it. They replaced the antagonist player with an app.
Yeah, that becomes the antagonist. I mean, technically speaking, Descent is really just like a glorified, more restrictive Dungeons and Dragons, isn't it?
Yeah.
In fact, there's the Wrath of Ashadalon and the Ravenloft that do work like that as well.
Yep.
Right?
Wrath of Ashadalon, Castle Ravenloft. There's the Legend of Drizzt.
Yeah. So they all do the same thing. Is that there is a DM kind of a game master running the game with other players. Having the fun.
Yeah. Okay, so I mean, those are just a couple of examples.
Yeah.
My other favorite play mode, of course, is next, and that is solo mode.
Oh, I love solo mode games. Yeah. So these became really big during the pandemic for very obvious reasons, right? But a solo mode is a game that allows a player to enjoy the game without needing any other player around them. They can literally haul out the game, and that's what I do quite often, is I haul out the game, set it up on the table, and I play by myself. I'm not going to say play with myself because that's different.
Phrasing is very important. Phrasing is very important in this one. But actually, it's something that a lot of very serious gamers do get into eventually.
Yeah.
Because it's hard getting people in a room at a certain time to play a game for a certain length of time, especially if everybody has different tastes. So I don't really like this kind of game, or you don't like this kind of game, and I can't get you to play this game. If I paid you, you could not get me to play a couple of games again under any circumstances. And that's just the fact of modern life, and it's all fine. Yeah. And we love our friends even if they don't love our favorite game.
Yes.
But then in the book, because we do have an entry about solo mode in the board game jargon primer, which is eventually getting a book. We are working on I'm supposed to be working on the book this evening, but don't talk about that. But in that entry, you describe solo mode as a gameplay variant. I mean, what do you mean by that?
So, quite a lot of newer games, and more now since the pandemic than before, the game is by and large cooperative or competitive, mostly competitive, right? And just for the sake of people who want to, who love the games, but don't always have the ability to haul out friends from the closet, handy somewhere, the gameplay includes what they call a solo variant. It's not the recommended way to play, but it is a variation on the standard rules. And there's two large groups of this, right? The first one is the beat your own score, right? And so the game, it's usually games that are like multiplayer solitaire, where everyone's doing their own thing on the table and they're not really interacting much. You can play the game by yourself without the interaction of the others, and you're basically just trying to beat your own high score. Some games include a rubric at the end that tell you, if you score this much, you've done really well, or they say if you haven't beaten this score, you haven't beaten this mode. And the other variant is an AI, or what they call an automa, right? And we use the term AI loosely in this case, not the one like ChatGPT, but it's a deck of cards, most often a deck of cards that simulate a decision space for other players. So it makes it feel like you're up against live opponents. And we're gonna get more into this in the future episode, the history of it and how it works and all that. But that's the basic of it.
Okay, so Automa and AI are both big enough topics that they'll probably get their own episodes. But basically, just like the short version is, it simulates a human opponent. But it also, like when we get to that episode, we'll talk about that. But I would want to talk about Wingspan solo mode in that sense, because it does something very different.
The one I want to talk about in that episode, when we get to it, is Roots Clockwork.
Expansion. Oh yes, you love Roots.
An entire expansion to simulate opponents, and it does it so well. It is fantastic. I love it. You were saying about you were going to say about solo only games.
Yeah, so solo only games. The one example that kind of springs to mind is Final Girl.
Oh yeah, which is so thematic. It is so good.
Yeah.
It's also an unusual how do you put it? It's an unusual release mechanism with the game, as in the game comes with what they call the core box, right? But the core box just contains the rules. It contains the pieces, most of the pieces that you use, and that's it, right?
Yeah.
The rest of the game is released as what they call it's themed boxes, and it's each its own little adventure. That's after a horror movie.
Yeah.
And it's unusual, but it does allow a surprising amount of flexibility without having to re-release those core components over and over and over again. You just get the box with the theme stuff. It's really cool.
Yeah. And then some other solo So some other better-known solo-only games are Friday by Friedman Fries.
The other one I have to mention is Rove. I'm not sure who it's by, but it's a gorgeous solo-only game, and you are trying to get a rover across the planet. I'll show it to you one day when you're over. It's really cute.
Okay, then the other sort of popular play mode that involves a specific number of players is two-player only games.
Yeah.
Now, these are often called duel, duet, or versus games, but the point is essentially the same. So there are always two players and only two players. So we're not talking about games that go from 2 to 5.
Yeah.
We're specifically talking here about games that are just for two people.
In fact, most of them don't even go from 1 to 2. It's just 2.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we're familiar with this one. This is, I think, one of the ones that we should be most familiar with in the form of chess or checkers or backgammon. We played a lot of these when we were kids as well, right? And look, so a lot of games, but when we're talking about specifically duet games, right, or versus games, quite often they're a branch of a bigger game, right, that plays at like 3, 4, 5, 7 players, and it works fantastically at those higher counts, but doesn't always work so well at 2 players. And so what the designers do is they say, let's rejig the entire game and make it work for exactly 2 players. So some examples, right? One that's been making a big splash lately is Splendor Duel. There's 7 Wonders Duel. I mean, the game is usually different enough in its overhaul that you can't play with other players, right? It's literally just the 2 players. And the mechanics are often different as well. Because if they weren't, why not release? Why not just give the original game, right?
And then there are sort of exceptional examples like Wingspan Asia, which is you can either add it to the base game or you can play it as a standalone between 2 players. Is that correct?
Yeah. So it's weird because it goes from 1 to 2 players as its own thing. So it's what they call expand-alone. That's the term they give it, right? So it goes. So the Wingspan Asia box has enough components for 1 to 2 players. You can play it solo. You can play it as 2 players. But if you add it to the base game, it pumps up the player count from 5 to 7. And nobody in our group wants to play it at the full 7.
Well, I don't know. We might actually, depending on if we have enough people. But then again, we also might have some people just drop out that night. Oh, I'm washing my hair. Okay, so then the final one we wanted to talk about as a separate thing is team-based games.
Yeah, so that's literally exactly what it says, right? Is that players are split up into teams and they play against other teams of players. And so when you win or lose, you're not winning or losing as an individual, you're winning or losing as a team. And, some games, they defined as team games from the start, right? So say, right, this game is, you can only play it in teams. And some games only split up into teams at higher player counts to control for time, to control for complexity. So I'll give you an example of that is Concordia, right? Which ostensibly goes up to 6 players with the Venus expansion. But they say if you're playing it at 6 players, you play in 2 teams of 3. You do not play it as individuals.
Okay. So then victory and loss, I suppose, goes to a team instead of individual players.
Yeah. So often to keep things interesting, right, the games, and again, like Concordia, the games limit how much and to what extent team members can share components, right? So, you're playing in a team, but you can't, your stash of goodies is only yours. And sometimes they say, oh, no, you got a shared pile of stuff that's, go nuts.
Yeah.
Some games you have no idea who your teammates are, especially with like social deduction games. Like, you have no idea who your actual teammates are. I'll give you an example is 2 Rooms and a Boom. You've got
Okay.
to figure out who your teammates are.
Yeah, and the other example is Blood on the Clock Tower, which I've played, but you haven't.
I'm dying to play that one. I'd love to
and
play it.
Basically, the purpose of that game, or the thing that you're trying to do, is you're trying to figure out who is in your team, who is on your side, and you have
Yeah.
very limited information that you at hand to be able to figure that out.
Yeah.
So it's like a team-based thing, but then there's sort of like a hidden. It's like a semi-co-op thing, because it's like also it's a very sort of unusual example again.
Now, the other one I want to mention is Captain Sonar, right? Which is unusual for a team-based game. It's that the game literally plays best at the full player count of 8, right? So you got 4 team members on either side, and you're playing as 2 submarines. But everyone on your team has a very defined role. You've got the captain, you've got the navigator, you've got the weapons guy. So, you're shouting instructions back and forth, and you're listening to instructions at the side, and you're trying to figure out where everyone is based on the instructions that's happening. Apparently, it's glorious chaos.
Yeah, I still want to play that. And I recently found out that they've got a board game group at my company, and somebody has a copy. Somebody has a copy of Captain Sonar. I will go to the office on a Friday evening to play Captain Sonar, which tells you how keen I am to try this out.
Yeah, no, I'm very keen to try Captain Sonar myself.
I mean, the appeal of team-based games is that the chaos, and then also the social aspect. So you're trying to you're working with people, and you're trying to solve problems, or overcome some sort of a communal challenge, but you're trying to do it faster than somebody else, or better than somebody else, or more effectively.
And I mean, some games added team-based modes well after the creation of the game. Look at Magic the Gathering.
Yeah.
Right. That's now got. I think the team-based mode is the most popular nowadays.
I can imagine.
What's it called, Commander?
I haven't played Magic the Gathering very much.
Yeah. When I was a young one, we used to have a team-based mode called Three-Headed Monster, and you play in 2 teams of 3, right? But you can only directly attack the enemies, the foes, to the direct side of you, the exposed side. So
okay.
that was called Three-Headed Monster. It was a fantastic mode. I played it a couple of times when I was younger, but I've got a lot of Magic.
Yeah,
it's too much of a money sink.
Yeah,
you said as if board games aren't.
yeah. Well, we might have a separate episode or a bonus episode on that, but yeah. Okay, so that was a lot. I think we were both surprised once we started looking at all the different play modes and like the complexity within each one. I think we were both surprised by the number of different play modes that there are, or the sort of variations that there are.
Just the sheer number of them.
Yeah. But then obviously, like we always do, the main question we want to answer in this episode is, how does this jargon help us?
So what you're going to find is that a lot of people actually prefer certain play modes to others. And it defines your level of comfort with how you want to interact with other people. So like you are more comfortable with cooperative games. I'm happy with everything, but I tend to throw a lot of chaos into the mix.
Yes, you do.
Yeah. But it also does, knowing the play mode of a game, it really tells you the kinds of interactions you're going to have in this game. And I mean, you're going to find some players don't, some groups don't enjoy hidden roles. They don't enjoy traitors. Some players don't enjoy deduction games, and so you're just not going to. Like, with our group, we tend to be a fairly non-confrontational group. So games that are in your face and really aggressive are not going to be popular with my bunch, as much as I love them.
I mean, there are exceptions, but
Yeah.
those are rare. Like
Yeah.
it's such a surprise when that happens. It's like most of the time, even when we're
Yeah.
playing a very competitive game like Scythe,
Yeah.
there's no combat. No one's going out fighting. Why? Because it's a waste of resources. Why would I go out and fight someone?
But I mean, even a game that encourages fighting and is all about the fighting, like Cosmic Frog,
Yeah.
it turned out to be, when you're not doing the fighting, it's a very droll game. The fun is actually in causing the chaos, but we're not going to get into that. And I mean, look, there's literally a play mode for just about every group, and even if it's just you and no group, there's a play mode for that as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think one of the things I'm really happy about in terms of like this particular term is just that variation and the diversity of the options that you have. So if you come up with the thing of like, okay, well, I'm trying to find a game for my kid and they're not at the age yet where they deal well with losing, look for a co-op game. If maybe one of your friends is very opposed to hidden role social deduction games and don't enjoy it, I could mention names. But like to pick a different type of game on the nights when that person is there, and then if they can't come, then you can always hold out the semi co-op game or the one versus many, and do something different. But there's no reason to force anybody to play in any particular mode. Like, if you don't like co-op games, don't play co-op games.
Yeah. There was one deduction game I wanted to mention, and it's a co-op, a purely co-op deduction game, which is unusual.
Yeah.
Right. That was the Shipwreck Arcana. Do you remember that? Where you've got two numbers in front of you, and you're trying to basically beat the clock, and trying to guess what the numbers are in front of other people based on what numbers they're putting back. And it's such a... I mean, I enjoyed it quite a lot. You enjoyed it as well, if I recall correctly.
Yes.
And our other friend that night did not. He does not like deduction games at all.
No, he does not.
But it's an interesting mechanic watching co-op and deduction happening at the same time.
Yeah, and I mean, there's... I suppose the Crypto is just a plain team-based game.
That's plain team-based, yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, there is an amount of deduction going on there, but it's not social deduction. It's mostly just like trying to guess. But yeah, so I mean, I think that's pretty much the reason we wanted to cover play modes as a separate episode, is just because it does open up a whole vista of options for you as a gamer and as a consumer.
Yeah.
And it might actually just be worth trying out some of these different play modes, or maybe trying to convince your group to say, hey, let's try something different. But then also, just understand that each of these is such a wide variety of examples that you could choose one or two of these and just keep playing, and you'd still find variations and diversity within that one play mode.
Correct.
If you do have a favorite play mode that you think we haven't covered, let us know.
Yeah, absolutely.
We'll either add it to the book or add it to the podcast episode list. And I'm fascinated by play modes.
Yeah. No, the different ways that you can interact with people in a game. It is something to think about, that there are so many ways to interact. So many ways to just play with other people. It's really cool.
Yeah. And we'll cover multiplayer solitaire as well at some point, but that's not really a play mode.
But no, that's a pejorative term on its own.
Yeah, that's a whole other thing. But yeah. Hey, so if you want to check out more about play modes and all the different versions and varieties that you can go over to nerdverse.co.za and look for a board game article called It's Complicated, a play mode for everyone. Looking forward to hearing what you think. Thank you for listening. You can follow us on various platforms and join the conversation on Discord. Links in the episode description wherever you found this podcast. You can find articles and discussions about the terms used in this podcast over at nerdverse.co.za. You can also find articles on a host of other subjects, including tabletop role-playing games, interviews, events, and how-tos. Your hosts were Jacques van Heerden and Fayyaad Hendricks, music editing and producer Fayyaad Hendricks, executive producer Jacques van Heerden. Unshuffled is a Nerdverse Productions podcast.